Hi, welcome to the virtual college fair. The session today is the CTCL presentation. We thank you for joining us. Just a few housekeeping announcements before we get started. You can use the Q&A button on your screen to type your questions to our presenters at any time. Your camera and microphone are off, so the panelists cannot see or hear you. This is just one of the many sessions happening, so be sure to sign up for additional sessions. And also, this presentation is being recorded and will be available within a week at the same website that you registered. I'd now like to turn it over to our presenters.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your schedule to be a part of this presentation for Colleges That Change Lives. My name is Chris Latham, and I'm the founding director of college counseling at Washington Latin Public Charter School in Washington, D.C. And I'll let my colleague introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kathy Finks. I'm Senior Associate Director of Admissions and Director of Campus Relations at the College of Worcester here in Worcester, Ohio. And we're excited that you're joining us today.
So there's a lot that we do want to cover. What we are hoping to get through and address for you is to define who and what CTCL is as an organization and our member colleges. We also want to dispel any myths that exist about the CTCL schools. We also want to provide you with some tools and resources to be able to use with your students and families as you are working with them to try to build their college list and help them see beyond some of the names that are constantly repeated in the higher ed world as you're thinking about really the fit for the student and the family. So in terms of who we are as an organization, back in 1996, author Lawrence Pope wrote a guidebook about colleges, and he wanted to do something that was different from the traditional types of guidebooks that relied a lot on college rankings. And so he wrote the book Colleges That Change Lives in narrative form as a follow-up to his first book, Looking Beyond the Ivy League. He wanted to ask families and counselors to think about the college search differently by moving away from the rankings, because the ranking doesn't always account for the individual student and for their hopes and dreams and needs that can create the potential for a transformative post-secondary experience. And we as an organization believe that this process should really be about the student. And there are so many voices, as I'm sure you know, I certainly know, being a high school counselor, that can enter the conversation and divert the process away from the student and what is going to be the best next step for them. And it ends up becoming more about the institutions, and we want this to be about them finding a place that will be a piece of their life forever, provide a foundation for them to have a successful and fulfilling life beyond college, and will hopefully nurture what we want to be a lifelong love of learning. So for us, it's not just about getting in, it's about what happens once the student is there, and then getting through college, and then on to what they'll do after they graduate and step out into the world, carrying those experiences from college with them. We do try to push back on some of the media frenzy and the statistics that focus on institutions with top rankings or the most name recognition. And we want to help families and you to be able to look beyond those rankings and the noise that often comes up in higher ed and in this process. We spend a lot of time talking about the quality and the value of a liberal arts education and try to support the recruitment efforts of our 42 member colleges. Next slide, Kathy. So here's a map of sort of where our schools are located. There are 42 member colleges in CTCL. We have 2 public colleges and 40 private colleges and universities. There are 25 states represented amongst our member colleges. And the average enrollment is a little over 1,500 students at each of the schools. So again, these are small liberal arts colleges. The enrollment amongst our schools will range anywhere from just a few hundred schools or students on campus to over 3,500 students on campus. So if you have kids who are looking for sort of the huge college experience and are hoping to find anonymity in their college community, our institutions are not those places. And that's fine, but we think that this is the type of experience that has great value for the right student, and we want to make sure that it has value for the individual student as well as the quality of experience and the values and mission of the institution aligning with the hoped for outcomes with the student. On the next slide that Kathy's going to go to, you'll see a list of all of our member institutions. These are not necessarily schools that would pop up on someone's list naturally, but once you come to know the schools, as I have over the years, you'll come to realize how much value each of these schools has for the right students. Some do a very traditional academic program, and some have programs where the student working with faculty advisors can build and create their own program of study. Some of the institutions on this list have conservatories of music in addition to a liberal arts education. One of the schools on the list, St. Mary's, is a Division I school. There are two D2 schools, Hillsdale and Eckerd, and the rest that offer athletics are Division III. So you can see, again, a variety of schools here. As an organization, just to give you sort of a timeline, we began working together as an organization in 1998, and the founding members of the organization were schools that were profiled in the 2006 book, and that's the last book that the author, Lauren Pope, himself wrote. There was an updated edition in 2012 that was commissioned by the family, and they asked Hillary Maisel Oswald to update that book. And in that 2012 edition, there were 4 additional colleges added into the book and organization. And in 2018, Bard College was added to the CTCL organization. The question that we always get as a board and as an organization is there going to be a new book? As you can see, it's been a little over 8 years since the last edition came out. And the easiest answer is to say that we don't know. Lauren Pope's family owns the rights to the books. And if they choose and their literary agency or their agent and the publisher choose to update the book, then there will be another one. But even though the book, as I'm sure you can imagine, in some ways is outdated, we still find that the opening chapter in talking about the value of a liberal arts education is still incredibly relevant and useful for you and for your families. But we would encourage you to visit the CTCL website and to read the college's profiles there for more updated information about our schools. So there are probably some things that you hear about a liberal arts education, which would also include CTCL. So let's talk about some of those things. Graduates fared better if, during college, they did any one of these: developed a relationship with a mentor, took on a project that lasted a semester or more, did a job or internship directly connected to their chosen field, or became deeply involved in a campus organization or activity, as opposed to being minimally involved in a range of things. I think this quote really exemplifies what an education at a CTCL member institution is really about. Because of the small size, because of the student-centered approach, these kinds of opportunities are really accessible to our students and students attending these institutions, and provides them with a lot of experience and relationships and networking opportunities to really craft their experience and prepare them for what is going to come next after they graduate.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in and say that what Frank is talking about here is related to the Gallup-Purdue survey, and where they surveyed over 30,000 graduates, and they were really looking at the qualities that made people feel successful in many different aspects, not just economic, but their emotional well-being, their satisfaction in their job, etc. And what they found is less about the name brand. That actually had very little to do with the predicted outcome or the actual outcome of what they saw in terms of real success. But it was about what Chris just mentioned. It's about those deep connections, those meaningful experiences, having that mentor, having those opportunities to act within the culture and campus, or the campus and community of that school. And so that's what we're hoping, you know, if you're a counselor on this call and you're out there talking to your families, that you can really start to promote, you know, who does this student in front of me, who do they want to be in 4 years, and how are they going to get there, and how do they want to grow and learn, and kind of, you know, start to dig deeper. So so actually this quote I think hits on two things, right? It talks about kind of dispelling just the name brand myth, but also kind of dispelling, you know, that you have to be at a large school to get some of those things done, which leads us into our next kind of topic. So why small schools? Chris, I know you hear this probably all the time as a counselor at a high school, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's also interesting because the school where I work is a pretty small school. We're 5 through 12 and have about 740 students in total. My senior class is blessedly fewer than 80 students. And so I have sort of two camps. I have the students who love their experience at Latin. They love the relationships with the teachers, the small class size, all of that. And then I have the kids who are like, I want to walk around and have no one know who I am. Not too much in the middle. It's like, I want to keep doing this, or like, I want the exact opposite of this, like very personal experience.
Yeah. And I think some of that is about listening to that student. But then when they say, okay, I really want a big school, you know, diving deep into that, what does that actually mean? What are some of the things that you're hearing? Well, I really like knowing my faculty. Okay, well, let's talk about that. And it is possible to do at some of those larger schools, but you really, you know, you have to have the right student who's going to make those efforts and make those connections. Things aren't going to be as readily accessible. So I always like to talk about why small school. I think sometimes it comes across as a negative automatically when I'm like, what? It should be the opposite. It should be why go big? You know, so it's really about promoting the positives, dispelling that kind of myth. And if we looked back at the survey that I just mentioned, it's about forming those relationships, and that's across campus, but really that student-centered, that's what all CTCL schools are founded on, that student-centered love of learning. So it's that student-faculty interaction. Are they going to have access to faculty? Are faculty actually going to know them? Are they going to be able to ask for help if they need it, or even when they don't think they need it? It's about, you know, small schools are about promoting that active learner. So what kind of learner are they? Do they like to dig in? Do they have to get their you know, hands into the mud, if you will? You know, do they want to be out? Is it more the norm that you could go on a small field trip? Maybe it's even just to a preschool. Maybe it's into a swamp nearby. Maybe it's to a desert. But you know, can they get really active learning in their classrooms, even if it's just in the classroom itself? Can they hear from their peers? At a small school, if you're looking at our schools, we have very diverse communities as well, and so you're not going to just be learning from your faculty, but you're going to be learning from your peers, and so picking up on that as well. You know, it's about, at small schools, it's about communication. Like I just mentioned, in the classroom, you have to get your ideas expressed and heard, and so that could be in the classroom, it could be in the writing prompts and the writing that you're going to do in college at a small school, and really digging into those presentations. And so many things are kind of at your fingertips when you look at small schools and the resources. And so it's about helping students understand how accessible those things are going to be and how they can take advantage of those as a learner. And so to do that, again, I think you have to step back with that student and ask them some questions about who are they as a learner, what do they want to accomplish, and how do they want to get there. And like Chris said, you know, having that kind of intimate connection might not be the right fit for every student, but we feel by and large that they really do gain when they have those things at their fingertips. So anything else you wanted to add here real quick, Chris, since you deal with this every day? Okay. The one that we hear a lot, liberal arts, what is that? You know, is it a liberal school? Can I even do science there? I think that the obvious answer is, of course, yes, you can. In fact, you know, I would argue, since I work at one and I see the science that's being produced here every day, that it's actually more possible to produce science, that you actually have more resources than being at a large school where you might compete with those resources, or being X'd out if you're not in the top 1 or 2 or 5 students in that field, in that class. But beyond that, I think that at our schools, we really strive to find not just, okay, I want to do science, but within science, what do I like? What do I want to pursue? How can I start to narrow down? You know, one of the things that you'll see is that the students in the labs really get to not only interact with a PhD professor, so it's not just a TA running it, but really get to interact with them, but they also get to use the equipment. And I think that, I think when you think about going to a school, you think, oh, of course they can. That's not the norm. In fact, that might be a question that you could have your students ask on the tours. How accessible is the equipment? Do they get to run any of it? Which will be hugely important for them as they go into grad school. I think the other thing to keep in mind when you're looking at what we've just been talking about and how interactive the learning is, one of the biggest things about any great scientific breakthrough is that the idea was expressed and heard, right? And so that's one of our strengths as liberal arts colleges, is that we're really trying to bring students into the forefront of how do you get that idea expressed and heard? How can you get that idea that you have down on paper or into a lab? And at our schools, they get to walk that through from point A to point Z. They get to really learn how to ask the right questions, how to begin that research, how to get that idea on paper, even when it doesn't work. And so that's something that then when you look at where our students go, whether it's there's some examples on here, onto medical schools, or whether it's looking at 3-2 programs, or whether it's doing scientific research or getting into graduate programs. If you go out and look at our collective schools and the amount of PhD candidates that we produce, or the amount of students that are going on to earn their masters, we outpace many other institutions, especially art schools, when you look at that. And so we're really proud of where our students are going and how they can interact. The other thing that I would just quickly mention in terms of science is that I think sometimes there's this myth that you need to be at a STEM focused school or right away be in a STEM major. But actually, Steve Jobs said that technology alone is not enough. It's technology married with the liberal arts, married to the humanities, that yields the best results, that makes our hearts sing. And I think that couldn't be more true today, that the science that they're learning is still going to evolve and create, and we need to see how those integrations are going to happen and how we're going to be paired together moving forward in the future. I think one of the other big stumbling blocks that can come across when students are initially, or maybe parents are initially doing that college search, is really, what is this investment going to be? And I use the word investment very purposely when I'm talking to families. What's my return on this investment going to be? And there's going back to that survey, I think it was the Gallup survey, but it might have been the NESE survey, but they were really looking at, when you looked at the return on investment, they agreed that their education was worth the cost, and then there's a multiplication factor of anywhere from 1 to 2. These are the scores that rank the highest, and you'll see very specifically that I sound like a broken record almost because I'm repeating myself, but it's those things that we as College that Changed Lives schools all believe in, we all pursue, and we all trying to make into our students' education. So it's, was it worth the investment? They looked, very specifically at, my professor cared about me more than a person. I had a mentor that helped me pursue my dreams. I had at least one professor that excited me about a class and my education. I worked on a project for a semester or 2. In fact, I think when, I work at Worcester has a year-long project. So does Reed, so does Allegheny has a semester project. There's several of us that take that project work to a different level. But they also, within our organization, it might be project work in a different way. It might be looking at internship as connected to a project or a pathway. It might be study abroad that Kalamazoo and some others do where it's required, and working that into a pathway or a project. Did they have an organization or a commitment to an organization that they really felt connected to and had leadership? Again, at these small schools, at our liberal arts schools, it's part of the norm. It's part of our, our passion and our curriculum. It's really hard to go to any of these CTCL schools and just go to your class and go back to your res hall. That's not who we are. That's not the students who are attracted to us. And so when you look then at the return on investment years later, that connection is still really meaningful. Maybe it's in terms of networking or where it led them or how they found their passion and how they merged that with their academics. And again, I kind of talked about that outcome piece with internships and finding jobs and again, collectively. But if you look small, if you start to dig down into some of our numbers and really look at some of these CTCL schools and how they fare with internships and fellowships, it's amazing. So what's in the cost? Oh, my slide's kind of looking weird here. But you can see that I think that there's a lot that's talked about with the debt crisis. And I agree with that in part, but you want to dig beyond that and really look at who's in those numbers. Because they often include adults who return to finish a degree and not looking at students who attend a 4-year institution or in our case, a 4-year private liberal arts institution, not private, a liberal arts institution, and what that means. We all strive to have our students graduate in 4 years or less if they're coming in with some credits. And if you look at how we're really managing that, it's because we still all look at the student and where they're coming from and award merit scholarships. Now there's 44 policies for 44 different schools, but we all are student-centered. I think I've said that at least 10 times now. And we really know that to be at a school with all these resources, yes, it's gonna, it costs us money, but we can't have a class and we can't have a diverse class, including socio and economic, unless we make that investment. We make the investment on our part as a college to really make the cost more meaningful for you as families. And so when you're looking at that cost, we hope that you really can the takeaway should be that we're here to listen to your applicants on who they are in terms of admissibility, but we're also here to look at them on where they are and how affordable it can be. I will just say one more, kind of quick thing when talking about the cost, maybe slicing ahead just a little bit, Chris, sorry. But we do now have 43 of our colleges that are now test score optional. And so I think when you're looking at merit scholarships, that might be a question that you're hearing from your students this year. How are my test scores going to be? CTCL as an organization for the last 10 years has been leading that front on being test score optional even before this year in the pandemic. I think we were closer to 70% of our schools that were test score optional. So for us, and some are test blind, for us, that not having a test score and not having time to have taken a retest is not going to be a factor for us and our merit scholarships. So I just wanted to take a side moment and talk about that.
And I think that goes back into just who we are as an organization and the mission and values of our member institutions in terms of looking at the whole student and being the right fit for the right student so that they can come to this institution or to any of these institutions and really grow as an academic and as a whole person. That the focus really is on who they are and not simply as a number in the admissions process and then once on campus.
Agreed. And so Chris, you can chime in here too. I think sometimes students don't always know to look for outcomes even of schools. Maybe they look for job outcomes, and we, again, when you're at a small school and it's part of the dynamic, we're graduating you in 4 years. We also know that you're going on to do something else at the end of those 4 years, whether it's a career opportunity or moving on to a professional or graduate school. That's part of who we are as CTCL schools. But some of these things they might not recognize right away. They might not know to talk about, like, what are some honors that students are getting? And so when you're looking at Watson fellowships and how competitive that is, or Fulbrights, where they get to go and travel abroad for a year, the fact that we had 42 last year from our member institutions, or Gilman Scholars, where they get to do a project here in the US, 32 of those, or Peace Corps. We have 3 of the top producers for Peace Corps volunteers for around the globe, which is really impressive. And so when you start to dig into some of those things that would matter the students, when they're looking maybe at grad schools or employers are looking at, oh, they had a Fulbright, or oh, you were a Fulbright scholar. Those kind of things I think bring to the forefront who CTCL is and how we really shine at these schools, all while at the same time that we are not these ultra selective schools, and we can still produce these top graduates that go on to do amazing things, some listed here, but also into careers and into graduate schools, like we mentioned earlier. And so our average acceptance rate into our CTCL schools is about 65%. So yes, you can have a meaningful educational experience and not be at a school where only 5% of their admissions get accepted in. Would you agree, Chris?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the virtues of, again, being at a small college like the CTCL member colleges is the relationships that our students are able to build with faculty members. And so it's much easier for faculty to be able to identify students for these kinds of programs and fellowships and opportunities. And because so many students are continuing with their education, it further reinforces this idea of a lifelong love of learning and nurturing that in our students and helping sort of to launch them into the world, either to continue their studies or, you know, to volunteer for the Peace Corps, to look for ways to give back to their community, whether it's local or global. Absolutely.
Great. And Chris, you can talk about this because this is your world, right? So digging in with students.
Very much right now, yes. So we have made some wonderful updates to the CTCL website. We now have a search engine that you and your students and families can use to help narrow down amongst the CTCL member colleges which ones may be a good fit for the students with whom you're working. You can search by academic program, by location in the country, by athletics, a variety of different ways to sort of narrow down and hone that list of schools to look at further. All of the colleges are requested to update their profile pages on the CTCL website. So even that initial research that you're doing, you can do that directly from the CTCL website before digging further and going to each member college's own website. And you can, of course, use the link that is on the CTCL profile page to be able to direct yourself and your students to the institution's website. But this has been a really great tool that I've been using with my students the past few weeks as well. We have some other resources that we think that might be helpful to you as you are learning more about our member institutions and working with your families. The CTCL website, of course, as we talked about, engagement and service and giving back is really important. And so the National Survey of Student Engagement is a really great resource that talks about the value of the type of institutions that are CTCL member schools. Kathy had mentioned earlier the Gallup-Purdue index report that was done. Loan debt information, of course, is really important. I think a lot of people hear liberal arts college or private college, and they're immediately seeing these enormous sticker prices. But this really is an investment in a student's education, and the colleges that are part of the CTCL organization have really worked hard, certainly in my own experience working with my students, to make their institutions affordable, whether that is through some of the schools meeting 100% of demonstrated need or being very generous in merit scholarships for students' academic achievements, community service, talents, and things of that nature. But the really important piece, of course, is student loan debt. And so looking at what kind of debt students are graduating with, and what that means in terms of impacting future academic pursuits or other future pursuits. Kathy also mentioned going on to produce students who are accomplished and taking advantage of these fellowships and things like that, and how many of our students are going on within the organization to pursue advanced degrees. And so this study that was done at Reed can be really helpful just to see the value of the small liberal arts college, the relationships with professors, the small class size, and really allowing students to dig deep and explore their academic interests such that that curiosity is nurtured and they continue even after their undergraduate experience to continue their education.
So thank you so much. We hope that you stay connected with us, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever your platform is that you use. We really do try and, especially on Instagram, but dig into some of the stories so that you can maybe potentially profile those with your students. at our 44 member schools. And so we're trying to keep up with all that's happening at all of those schools. And so come back and check those and like us and share us, and that would be great. But we do want to save some time so that we can answer some of your questions. And so I'm hoping that, Chris, I don't know that I can see the chat right now. Let me go see if I can see it. But if not, Chris, Chris Wild, would you mind sharing some of the Q&A and reading a question that we could answer, please?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of questions that have come through that we thought would benefit the broader group. And the first one is, could I get a copy of the PowerPoint?
Yes, it is being recorded, and in about a week, it will be out on, I'm not sure what site, but we can, did Annabelle say what site it's on, Chris?
I think it's going to be on the StriveScan website.
Perfect.
Another one, and this is that slide that you were showing that was talking about the student loan debt. It said, are these costs of attendance based on state residency, meaning do they pay out-of-state tuition?
So there are only two public colleges as part of the CTCL organization. And so that's where you're going to see the difference between in-state and out-of-state tuition determined by residency. But for the rest of the member colleges, the cost of attendance, tuition, room and board, all of those things is going to be the same regardless of a student's residency.
Oh, and there was, oh, I thought there was one more, but it disappeared. There is another one. Some parents are worried about the financial viability of the smaller colleges. What questions can my parents ask to address that concern?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there's a couple of things you want to keep in mind. You want to start to look at, how is the school going to try and prepare me to graduate in the allotted timeline? And so at our institutions, we really are working to have you graduate in 4 years, if that's your plan. Some might be 3 years based on credits, like I mentioned, that they're coming in. But we, as kind of our mission of our institutions, are looking to have you there for the time that you need to be and not extending it, right? So we're not trying to elaborate on that. And so why do I bring that up first? Because if you look at some other institutions, they don't have the support structure in place to make sure that you're staying on track. If you switch majors, or if you can't get the right class, how is that going to affect your graduation rate? And then will that add another semester cost to you, or another hurdle in terms of your education? We roll our costs into one, so we're looking at tuition, room and board, and then looking at merit scholarships and financial aid on top of that to make it really look affordable as well. Well, all colleges have some way that you can look online to see what that initial cost is going to be with a predictive model. But many of our CTCL schools will go a step further and really try and delve in based on who you are, based on what classes you're taking, what activities you're doing, to look to see what merit scholarship you might get coming in, and also what financial aid you might get even before you're admitted. And so taking some of those, if you're looking at some of our schools and you start to dig into the merit scholarships and financial aid, you can look for those models on our website, and that might be another great step for students to do, so that they can help their families see, oh, this is affordable, this is what it's going to look like when they're looking at these schools. Chris, you deal with this every day. Is there other things you would suggest?
I would actually suggest all of the things that you did, asking about student loan indebtedness, asking about opportunities for merit scholarships, as well as need-based aid, using the net price calculators on the college's websites. CTCL as an organization, we also have a scholarship for students who attend CTCL schools, for which they can apply in February, usually January of senior year, that's publicized. But I think really, especially when I start working with my juniors, it's really about preemptively going through this process and starting with the net price calculators to get a sense of affordability, and then looking at merit scholarships and how that will factor in. I just wanted to address the question earlier about public institutions and out-of-state residency. The two public colleges that are part of the CTCL organization are Evergreen and New College of Florida. And so those are the two institutions where there would be a difference in tuition costs based on state residency, but for the rest of the member colleges, it would be the same regardless of the state of residence.
Wonderful. A follow-up question. Parents are also asking about the financial stability of small colleges. They've heard about small colleges closing. How can they evaluate the health of a college?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially since we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? I think that, I'll speak real quick just on Worcester, because I know that that carries through actually to Chris, your school at Goucher, and to Lauren at Rhodes, that our presidents are really active, and they're actually posting things out on our websites about where we are as an institution, where we are with the health of our students, but also the health of our institutions in terms of wealth. And so, that's a great question that you can start to dig into. I know it sounds a little daunting, but on your own when you get to those. We're institutions that have had very generous alumni support to get us to where we are, to be such a healthy collective group of schools, to be, you have to be a healthy, vibrant school to produce the outcomes that we have, right? Produce the students going on and doing those amazing, whether it's, again, the graduate schools or careers they're launching into, or their honors, their fellowships they're learning. That doesn't just happen if you don't have any health and academic health at your school. So in order to do that, we've all relied on generous support of alumni and the contributions that donors have made. And so that also helps us in this time of need be schools that can weather that storm a little bit more than some other schools that don't have that health as an institution. And so, but again, sorry, I'm sidetracking. You can go out to schools. I think you'd be surprised at how transparent our schools are trying to be in this age. I think some of it is because our students demand it, and we're right there to say, hey, we hear you, and we know that this is a stressful time, and so here's where we are as an institution. And I think that you'd be pleasantly surprised at how well that our member schools are doing right now in light of all of the current changes that are happening and some certainty and unknown.
We had a question about international students and offering financial aid and support for international students. And I just wanted to let everyone know there is a session specifically for international students for CTCL tomorrow morning, Wednesday, September 30th at 9 a.m. Central Time. But I wonder, Kathy and Chris, if maybe you can talk generally about how supportive CTCL schools tend to be for international students and for undocumented students.
Yeah, and actually, Lauren, this is your world too, so you can feel free to chime in, but I'm gonna take one step back before I talk about international students so that you understand how important diversity is at our schools. If we're small schools, again, and we're gonna have small classrooms, we want diversity of thought. And so it is things I mentioned earlier. It's racial diversity, it's religious diversity, it's gender diversity, it's in some cases it's geographic diversity, which leads then social and economic diversity, but geographic diversity leads into international diversity. And all of our schools really have been on the forefront of pushing that envelope because we know how important that is to a student's education to have such varied backgrounds. So each of our member schools might have slightly different policies on how they fund international students, but it is, as a collection of schools, we are here and are supportive and are actively recruiting international students. In fact, for years, we actually traveled together, some of us for CTCL fairs, in South America, in Asia. And so it really has been a mission of our institutions to do that. Did I miss anything in terms of a broad stroke, Lauren, that you might chime in on?
Nope, perfect.
Okay. Are there any other questions before we head out? If not, I'll just quickly say thank you so much for joining us. We really do like to try and connect in person. Obviously, that's not possible. So we're trying this virtual connection. We really are here to answer questions. So whether it is Chris or myself or, oh, here's the question slide, or Lauren or Chris who are on this call, or anyone on the CTCL board, past or present. You can go out to our CTCL website. You can see who's on the board. You can ask them questions. You can ask our chair, Christine Bowman at Southwestern University, questions. We also will do presentations. If you're a counselor out there and you have a counselor group or you're a high school counselor and you want us to come and present, please let us know, and we're happy to come and talk in person if that's possible or when that's possible, but if not, virtually, because we do, the more connection, the more transparent, the more information that you guys have out there for your college search, the better it will be, and we're here to help with that process. So thank you, and Chris, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Kathy, for co-hosting with me.
Yeah, sure, it was fun.
Yes, and thank you to all the panelists who were able to provide their time, and thank you for joining us today as well. When you close your window, there will be a link to a very quick 4-question survey. We'd appreciate any feedback you can provide. Also, this was just one of the many sessions being hosted, so please be sure to sign up for additional sessions. In about a week, you will also be able to find this session's recording, as well as any other sessions that you've attended. Again, thank you and have a great day.